Hello, hello. Welcome, guys. It's your boy Brian Z. Welcome to day 75 of Workout Grind. Today is chest day. Yesterday was arms day, and I finally get to do an arms day for this week. It's sort of a comeback from not being able to do so this whole week. So here I am. I don't know if I should actually go with. Yeah, you know what? Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's make it 7-5, 7-6-5, 7-6-5. You know what? 6-5-4. You know what? I'm gonna use this. Just bam. Seriously? Twisted 5. Is this like it? No, that's 20. 17, 15. Ooh. Oh man, that's gonna suck. What's our deal again? Let's go 7-6-5 as well. You know what? Side shrug, that's definitely gonna be 20. 10, 9, 8. Kick the back. Yeah, that's 9. That's 17. Now let's leave split squats as is. Let's go, man. Hey, you know what? Fuck it. All right. Okay, let's go.
Mystery is to limit discomfort and, of course, ensure the species persists. So reproduction is key, and then making sure that our offspring, which need a lot of care over a long period of time compared to other species, are taken care of. Like when you step back as just like pure evolutionary lens, it, to me, seems pretty much that simple, and all the rest is noise, as they say. So if our goal in human evolution is to rid ourselves of discomfort and make things easier and safer and propagate the species, then why at some point is more comfort bad for us?
There are side effects that happen, right? And when you look at most of the diseases that kill us today, they are a result of usually overconsumption of food.
Oh man.
Right? We eat too much, far more than we often need. We don't move enough. There's a lot tied to sort of metabolic health.
Whatever.
And so I think that I put this in the, I like to say, these are good problems to have in the grand scheme of time and space, right? I would prefer to have my problem be that, oh, I have to go exercise or something to take care of my physical activity than the fact that like, oh, I have to go hunt and gather every single day, like to get my food. But I do think that they are problems that we need to solve. The fact that, you know, a lot of our modern problems are driven by the fact that our environments have become so comfortable. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers the question. I heard someone say recently that a lot of what exists now in health and wellness is just trying to bring the outdoors indoors. Yeah. So I've tried to persuade, as everyone knows, people to get outside in the morning and get sunlight in their eyes for all sorts of reasons. But, you know, the whole business with red light, you know, long wavelength light, infrared light, you can use one of those panels. It can be quite useful. There's also a lot of long wavelength light coming from the sun. Fresh air, we could debate grounding, but many people believe it's helpful. Green spaces. I mean, I kind of agree with this idea that, you know, so much of what we're encouraging people to do is just mimic doing what we used to do all the time.
It's what life used to be, right? Like I said, we spend 100% of our time in the outdoors. We evolved in the outdoors. That is kind of like our natural environment. And I think to continue with this example, when you put us in four walls where we don't get that outdoor exposure, some interesting psychological things start to happen that probably aren't that good for us. And this, you can apply this idea to everything. Like I said, like even physical activity. It's like exercise is a great example to me. No one exercised in the past, right? Exercise is something that we made up basically after the Industrial Revolution, because what happened is we get these jobs where now we're much more sedentary. And we start to realize, oh, these people who have the jobs where they sit all day, they're getting these strange new health problems that we've never seen. And yet the people who are kind of moving around all day still in their jobs, they don't seem to get those problems. So maybe activity is the difference maker. Hey, you guys that are sitting all day, I want you to just go move around for the sake of it. No, there's no actual point to it. Just like move around for the sake of it. That'll improve your health. And this becomes this idea of exercise, movement for the sake of it, which is this kind of strange idea in the grand scheme of time and space. But it does make sense in the context of a world where the average American is walking, 4,000 to 6,000 steps a day. That's how we get our activities. We have to manufacture it effectively. And I will say, though, to continue with your example about how we sort of mimic what we used to do in the past, I do think that when we try to solve for these problems, sometimes the way we do it is sort of interesting. We go, okay, if we need to move more, well, what if we got a belt and we put a motor on it and a person could just run on this belt in this air-conditioned building? Oh, and then we'll put a television there, and that way you can just watch CNN blare insane information into your face the entire time and be totally distracted. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. But when we do that, what are we missing? So when a person runs outdoors, on the other hand, let's say it's on a trail, well, now you have all these other forms of discomfort and stimulation that are coming your way. So one, you've got the physical activity, obviously, but two is that the trail isn't this perfectly predictable thing, right? If I'm on the treadmill, I can go, okay, 1% incline, I'm gonna run 6 miles an hour, and I just do that. I don't have to think about it. Well, the trail, it's gonna go up and down. You're gonna have rocks and ruts you have to navigate under. That's a mental challenge. You're also gonna have to think about the weather, right? Now, I have to deal with the temperature changes. Oh, that looks like a storm might be coming in. There's also so much more that you take in from the environment. You're running through trees. You run into open spaces. And that has, I think, a real emotional, and I would say even spiritual benefit from that nature. You're gonna see totally random things, right? Like my favorite thing is when I go run on trails in Las Vegas, and like you see that random coyote or the bighorn sheep, and it's just like, this is it.
Mountain lion?
Mountain lion.
Have
right.
you seen mountain lions?
I've seen them other places, but not in Vegas, unfortunately. Most people would say, fortunately, I'm on the other side. Like, mountain lion's not gonna hurt you. But if you get to see one, that's an opportunity.
I don't know, that video of that kid in Colorado, where it's chasing him.
Oh, yeah,
or stalking him, and we could talk about that. I totally agree. I think that optic flow that of the sort that you get out when you're hiking or walking or cycling or more dangerous activity like motorcycling out of doors, we know that it has a powerful effect in suppressing some of the areas of the brain involved in fear. I don't know if you're familiar with this literature, but Francine Shapiro, who was actually ran her clinic behind Stanford for a while, who came up with EMDR, this eye movement desensitization reprocessing for trauma. came up with that on a walk and developed the lateral eye movements that are the cornerstone of EMDR as a way to bring the walk into her clinic.
Interesting.
Because, and then for years I would hear about this and I thought it was complete garbage. I was like, as a neuroscientist, I was like, no. And people would say, oh, the eye movements mimic rapid eye movements in sleep. That's why it works. And no, they don't look anything like the rapid eye movements in sleep, by the way. They say, oh, it's creating cross-hemispheric activation on the two sides of the brain. No. I mean, you get that if you have binocular vision, vision scientists. I was like, no, that's ridiculous. But then somewhere around 2016 to 2020, there were 4 papers and then an additional paper in animal study. So there's a mix of animal and human data showing that when animals or humans engage in this lateralized repetitive eye movement back and forth, that it suppresses, among other areas, the amygdala. So amygdala activation troughs. And so there's something about forward ambulation, nerd speak for walking and running, right? That suppresses the fear areas of the brain. And I'm convinced that this is a central reason why movement out of doors is so fundamentally different on our psyche and our level of calm as compared to running on a treadmill or, God forbid, just sitting at a desk all day.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I would wonder evolutionarily if that would be for hunting. So something like persistence hunting, right? That's a dangerous act. Yes, you have to hunt every single day. That's how you're going to survive to get that food. At the same time, it's still very perilous, right? You're not walking down to Walmart and getting stuff. And so if you had that fear suppression in the context of an act that is somewhat dangerous, that would probably give you an advantage to actually end up taking down that animal.
Huge. There's a video of some hunters, it appears to be in Africa, forgive me for not knowing exactly where it was, prepared to essentially walk towards a group of lions that are on a kill. And the lions look up from the kill, and there are these hunters walking like with spears vertical, right? And the lions are like, wait, what's going on here? Typically this is the other, the scenario is the other way around. Are you familiar with this video?
No.
And the hunters, they're translating into the captions and assuming it's accurate. They're saying, it's key that we just keep moving forward. And that confuses the lions, and they think that, that because we're continuing to look at them and move forward, they'll move off the kill. But if we avert our gaze, then they won't, and we can get attacked, and it's happened before. And they literally walk these lions off the kill. And the lions you can see that they're perplexed, but they're like, these guys aren't afraid at all. And they just sort of start backing away, and a couple of them are negotiating in their minds, you can see. And they basically walk these lions off the kill and take the kill. And there's so much going on there but it relates to what we're talking about. But forward ambulation in the context of hunting, I agree with you. I think it could have huge implications.
Also a great metaphor for life right there, right? It's like just keep moving forward. If you just kind of focus on the kill, as it were, and just keep moving forward, don't hesitate, like that can get you pretty far.
So you're a writer.
Yeah.
But you get into the outdoors a lot.
I do.
And you do hard, scary things on
Sometimes.
purpose. Yeah. So I'm curious about the younger Michael Easter. When you were a kid, were you the kid that would like hold on to the firecracker to the very last second? Were you the kid that was like, let's jump that roof into the pool? I'm not giving suggestions here, but I knew kids like that. They usually were named Johnny for whatever reason. There's a correlation there. Were you that kid, or were you the writer kid?
So I was not the kid that would hold the firecracker to the last second, jump from the second story into the pool. And I'm still not that person. I'm a person where if I had a good reason, what sort of bigger thing is holding that firecracker to the last end going to give me, then I'm perfectly willing to accept that risk.
Okay.
So the things that I do that might be considered dangerous or challenging, I always assume there's going to be a greater reward at the end. I'm not just doing something hard for the sake of doing something hard. Think about it like you're skateboarding, okay? As you were learning how to skateboard, I'm sure you fell a lot.
Yeah, all the time.
Banged yourself up, got all these scuffs on your arm, but the point wasn't to fall.
No.
Falling, however, was something that came as you got better as a skateboarder. Right? So the point is not to fall. The point is to go, okay, what is the overall goal? To be better as a skateboarder. And in the process, I'm probably going to have to do some things that maybe bang me up a little bit, that have some element of danger, but to focus on that overall goal. So I'd say I've always been like that. And I personally find, as a journalist, I mean, I read a lot of studies. I speak to experts. I call people like you who have a PhD, pick their brain. But I also find that sometimes I get the best information and can better process it and put it into a narrative that someone can identify with and maybe learn from it more if I actually go to the source and I have a story around that. And sometimes for me, going to the source leads me into places that are a little bit, I would say, off the beaten path, maybe. Yeah, sometimes I go to labs, and there's no danger there. Plenty of coffee, nice and air conditioned. Nothing's going to go wrong. But, my work has taken me to some war zones, to the middle of the jungle in the Amazon. I went up to the Arctic for 30 days. I just completed this long hike in the middle of nowhere, Utah. And I do find that on those trips, that's where you start to peel back the deeper layers of whatever idea I'm trying to communicate. So I think that there's a big difference between intellectual understanding and experiential understanding. And it's that experiential understanding, like, I want to get to the heart of that. I want to get to the heart of that. Because if I can communicate that, I have a higher probability of getting a person who reads my work to perhaps take an action that could improve their life. And it doesn't have to be big. I'm not suggesting people have to go to the jungle or go up to the Arctic. But I am saying start where you're at and do something that's maybe a little bit out of your comfort zone, maybe a little bit of a challenge, and see how it goes. Oh, you didn't die? Great. Maybe try it the next day and the next day. And so by sort of continuously pushing that edge, I think that people find that you don't fall off the edge. The edge tends to expand. And as the edge expands, you end up a better person.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about your 2% rule and some of the other. Welcome to the Huberman Lab podcast, where we discuss science and science-based tools for everyday life. I'm Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. My guest today is Dr. Adam Grant. Adam Grant is a professor of organizational psychology at the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania. He has authored 5 best-selling books and most recently has authored a new book entitled Hidden Potential. He received his bachelor's degree from Harvard University and his doctorate from the University of Michigan. Today we discuss peer-reviewed studies and tools based on the data from those studies that can enable people to meet their goals and overcome significant challenges, including how to overcome procrastination, as well as how to see around or through blind spots, as well as how to overcome sticking points in motivation and creativity. We also discuss the research on and practical tools related to the underpinnings of performance in any endeavor, including how to increase one's confidence and how to have a persistent growth mindset. By the end of today's episode, it will be clear to you that Dr. Adam Grant has an absolutely spectacular depth and breadth of knowledge, and that knowledge is both practical, it is based on peer-reviewed research, and he conveys those tools with the utmost clarity and generosity. Indeed, by the end of today's episode, you will have more than a dozen new tools never discussed before on the Huberman Lab podcast that you can apply in your academic endeavors, in athletic endeavors, in creative endeavors, in fact, in any area of life. Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my teaching and research roles at Stanford. It is, however, part of my desire and effort to bring zero cost to consumer information about science and science-related tools to the general public. In keeping with that theme, I'd like to thank the sponsors of today's podcast. Our first sponsor is 8 Sleep. 8 Sleep makes smart mattress covers with cooling, heating, and sleep tracking capacity.
I've spoken many times before in this podcast about the fact that getting a great night's sleep really is the foundation of mental health, physical health, and performance. One of the key things to getting a great night's sleep is to make sure that the temperature of your sleeping environment is correct. And that's because in order to fall and stay deeply asleep, your body temperature actually has to drop by about 1 to 3 degrees. And in order to wake up feeling refreshed and energized, your body temperature actually has to increase by about 1 to 3 degrees. With 8 Sleep, you can program the temperature of your sleeping environment in the beginning, middle, and end of your night. It has a number of other features like tracking the amount of rapid eye movement and slow wave sleep that you get, things that are essential to really dialing in the perfect night's sleep for you. I've been sleeping on an 8 Sleep mattress cover for well over 2 years now, and it has greatly improved my sleep. I fall asleep far more quickly, I wake up far less often in the middle of the night, and I wake up feeling far more refreshed than I ever did prior to using an 8 Sleep mattress cover.
If you'd like to try 8 Sleep, go to 8sleep.com/Huberman. Now through November 30th, as a special holiday discount, 8 Sleep is offering $500 off their bundles with a pod cover. 8 Sleep currently ships in the USA, Canada, the UK, select countries in the EU, and Australia. Again, that's 8sleep.com/Huberman. Today's episode is also brought to us by Levels. Levels is a program that lets you see how different foods affect your health by giving you real-time feedback on your diet using a continuous glucose monitor. One of the most important factors in your immediate and long-term health is your blood sugar or blood glucose regulation. With Levels, you can see how different foods and food combinations, exercise, and sleep patterns impact your blood glucose levels. It's very easy to use. You just put the monitor on the back of your arm, and then you take your phone and you scan it over that monitor now and again, and it downloads the data about your blood sugar levels in the preceding hours. Using Levels has allowed me to learn a tremendous amount about what works best for me in terms of nutrition, exercise, work schedules, and sleep. So if you're interested in learning more about Levels and trying a continuous glucose monitor, you can go to levels.link/Huberman. Levels has launched a new CGM sensor that is smaller and has even better tracking than the previous version. Right now, they're also offering an additional 2 free months of membership. Again, that's levels.link/Huberman to try the new sensor and 2 free months of a membership. Today's episode is also brought to us by Waking Up. Waking Up is a meditation app that includes hundreds of meditation programs, mindfulness trainings, yoga nidra sessions, and NSDR, non-sleep deep rest protocols. I started using the Waking Up app a few years ago because even though I've been doing regular meditation since my teens, and I started doing yoga nidra about a decade ago, my dad mentioned to me that he had found an app, turned out to be the Waking Up app, which could teach you meditations of different durations and that had a lot of different types of meditations to place the brain and body into different states, and that he liked it very much. So I gave the Waking Up app a try, and I too found it to be extremely useful because sometimes I only have a few minutes to meditate, other times I have longer to meditate. And indeed, I love the fact that I can explore different types of meditation to bring about different levels of understanding about consciousness, but also to place my brain and body into lots of different kinds of states depending on which meditation I do. I also love that the Waking Up app has lots of different types of yoga nidra sessions. For those of you who don't know, yoga to cover. And now for my discussion with Dr. Adam Grant. Adam, welcome.
Excited to be here.
Very excited to have you here. Your career, both public-facing and academic career, have covered an enormous range of topics. So we have a lot to cover.
Look who's talking.
And anytime 2 professors sit down, or even one professor says we have a lot to cover, I think everyone listening braces themselves like, oh no. But these topics, I assure everyone, are of the utmost interest, and you cover them in such both fabulous detail, and you make it very clear. So I'm really looking forward to this. I'd like to start off by talking about something that I'm obsessed by, and I know a lot of people are obsessed with and struggle with. And I know you also have a recent publication on this topic, which is procrastination. I am a bit of a procrastinator, but a different way of stating that is that I love deadlines. I learned in college that I love deadlines because it seems to harness my focus and my attention. I like just enough, I guess you call it anxiety or autonomic arousal for the neuroscience or physiology oriented folks. For me, just brings about a total elimination of all of the distractors, and it seems to both slow and accelerate my perception of time, and it seems to bring out my best to have deadlines. But I would prefer to not have to procrastinate in order to self-impose deadlines. I prefer that other people impose those deadlines, in fact. So what do we know about procrastination? Why do some people complete things well in advance? Why do other people procrastinate? Is it that they're seeking deadlines, as I believe I am? And interestingly, and sort of alluding to this recent paper of yours, what is the relationship between procrastination and creativity?
I feel like we should just deal with all that later. Let's put it off. No.
Good one. By the way, there's extra credit for science puns on here, so
Wait,
nicely done.
One of the best articles on procrastination ever written was titled, "At Last, My Article on Procrastination."
Fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, it just made me smile. So I think the basic question, I think, to start with is, why do we procrastinate? And I thought I was immune, actually, when I came into this topic. I was the person who annoyed my college roommates by finishing my thesis a couple months early. I found out there was a term for me. I'm a precrastinator. So the focus and the pressure that you get from a deadline, I get that the moment the project starts, and sometimes months or years in advance. And so I was really proud of finishing everything early. And then I discovered there are things that I procrastinate on too, which was a little bit disappointing.
Are you willing to share what some of those were?
I am. So I procrastinate on anything that's administrative. So
I'm right there with you.
you want to get time on my calendar? It could take me weeks to respond. You ask me a question about social science, I will be back to you in a minute. I procrastinate on grading. Takes me forever. I basically put off a whole bunch of tasks that I thought had nothing in common. It turns out that I procrastinate when I'm bored. Like boredom is, I guess it's probably my most hated emotion. And so I will do anything to avoid a boring task. And I think this goes to why people procrastinate, which is a lot of people think it's laziness or you're not disciplined enough. But actually the research on this is really clear that you're not avoiding work when you procrastinate. In fact, a lot of our procrastination is focused on doing things that involve a lot of energy. You've seen people probably clean their entire houses when they're putting off a task. So it's not that you're being lazy, it's that you're avoiding negative emotions that a task stirs up. So for me, it's boredom. For a lot of people, it's fear or anxiety. I don't know if I can pull this off. I have an extreme case of imposter syndrome in this role. The challenge in front of me is too daunting. For some people, it's confusion. I haven't figured it out yet. And so I can't work on this because I feel like I'm stuck. So I guess the big question for you then, Andrew, is what's the emotion that causes you to procrastinate?
You know, it's hard for me to identify the stick here. I think of it more as the carrot that comes with deadlines. And again, I don't consider myself a procrastinator per se. I just really love deadlines, and procrastination is a terrific way to simulate the deadline. So for me,
So you delay starting or finishing a task in order to have a sense of time pressure.
that's right. It builds a certain amount of internal arousal in me to know, okay, I've got 72 hours to complete something, and it's now game time. I like the game time before the game time. Before a podcast, I'll put in anywhere from several days to weeks or even months in preparation. So it's really elastic depending on the topic. But when it came to exams in school, or if it comes to writing deadlines, I consider the shipping of the product or the presentation of the live event that I happen to be doing as the second game or event. The first event is the pressure and the excitement of getting into the groove of doing focused work. Because for me, that's such a drug. I mean, it feels like having all the systems of my brain and body oriented towards one specific thing is just sheer bliss for me.
So it sounds like then you're actually not a chronic procrastinator.
Thank you.
At all.
That's never been the way I viewed myself, but now I'll take that.
It's a strategy for you.
It is a strategy. That's right. And I was fairly wayward youth, barely finished high school, et cetera. So by the time I got serious about school, which was my second year of university, when deadlines were presented, like there's a midterm exam on a given date, that was exciting to me. That was exciting. It was like, okay, that's the big thing. That's my opportunity to prove myself to myself, because I was really coming from behind. And then the opportunity or I should say the feeling of dropping into that groove, like this is the exciting part, is the preparation. Likewise with podcasting, for our solo podcast, I love the research as much as I love presenting the material. Maybe more, right? Likewise for university lectures or for traveling and giving seminars as a traditional academic. I'm sure you're familiar with that, right? It's
Of course.
the preparation is where you realize, it's almost like, I think of it as somebody like a miner in a mine and just finding a gem. And of course, there are all the thoughts of what you can do with that later. And you're going to show people it has a certain value to the world, et cetera. But it's the searching and finding those gems that is like, even as I talk about it, I feel like my body's going to float out of the chair a little bit.
I have the same experience. It's the sort of the unleashed curiosity and then the rush of discovery. And by the time you're teaching it or explaining it, like, but I already know this. Like, I'm not learning anything anymore. And yes, I'm excited to share it, and I hope it's helpful to other people. Mm-hmm. So, I think as you talk about what your process looks like, I don't even think what you do qualifies as procrastination technically.
This is getting better and better.
I mean, seriously, if you think about how procrastination is defined, it's delaying despite an expected cost. And you don't think there's a cost. You actually see a benefit.
That's right. And I've tried starting
That's
things.
not procrastination. That's just delay.
Yeah, I've tried starting things earlier. And I should say that my process often begins much earlier than the physical process. Like if I was being observed in an experiment, okay, Andrew's finally sitting down to write this book chapter, or, finally sitting down to research some papers for an episode. But I'm thinking about it all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, much to the dismay of people in my life. I'm constantly thinking about these things. I mean, walking to take out the recycle. I'll have ideas and then I'll write them down. I constantly am writing things down, voice memos into my phone. I have a method of capture where I basically try and just grab everything and then filter out what's useful. Do you have a process like that for gleaning ideas?
A little bit. I do now. So when Jihye Shin and I started this research on procrastination, she had come to me. She was a very creative doctoral student, and she said, "I have my best ideas when I'm procrastinating." Mm-hmm. And it was one of those moments where I didn't believe her, but I thought it was an interesting enough idea that it was worth exploring. And I said, "Show me. Let's get some data. Let's see if we can test this." And she ended up gathering data in a Korean company where she surveyed people on how often they procrastinate, and then got their supervisors to rate their creativity. And sure enough, found that people who procrastinate sometimes were rated as more creative than people who rarely do, like me, the precrastinators. And I remember asking her, "What about the chronic procrastinators?" And she's like, "I don't know. They never filled out my survey."
Yeah, as I recall from that paper, there's kind of inverted U-shaped function with procrastination on the vertical axis and creativity on the horizontal axis. Flipped. Sorry. Okay, so explain to me then the relationship between procrastination and creativity.
Yeah. So basically, the peak of creativity is in the middle of procrastination.
Okay, got it.
And yeah, there's an upside down U curve there. And so then I thought this was fascinating. So then, we go into the lab to say, can we replicate this? Can we control it in an experiment? And the hardest part of that was, how do you randomly assign people to procrastinate? To my knowledge, never been done before. And we eventually figured out that we could give people a bunch of tasks to do and then tempt them with highly entertaining YouTube videos that were sort of placed on their screen. And we put different numbers of YouTube videos there so that, if there's only one, you're not tempted to procrastinate much. If there are 4, you're probably going to get sucked into a little bit of a YouTube spiral. If there are 8, you might be putting off the task that's much less exciting than watching Jimmy Kimmel's mean tweets, for example.
And this was done in a fairly naturalistic environment for these folks?
People are on a computer. They're asked to solve some creative problems that look pretty similar to what you might do in your job, and then we're going to score your creativity later. And it turned out that the people who were tempted to procrastinate moderately ended up generating the most creative ideas. So why is that? There are a couple of things that happen, and you have to look at both sides of the curve. So what's wrong with the precrastinators, and also what happens to the extreme procrastinators? And in both cases, what happens is you end up with a little bit of tunnel vision. So when I dive right into a task, I'm stuck with my first ideas. And I don't wait long enough to incubate and get my best ideas. I'm less likely to reframe the problem. I'm less likely to access remote knowledge because I'm just diving right in. And meanwhile, the chronic procrastinators end up in the same boat because they don't get started until the last minute. And so they have to rush ahead with the easiest idea to implement, as opposed to really developing the most novel idea. And meanwhile, the people in the middle who, are starting to feel that pressure of like, wow, I kind of spun my wheels for 10 minutes watching a bunch of YouTube videos. I'm running out of time for this task. They still have enough time to work on the ideas that were active in the back of their minds, and that gives them a shot at more novel ideas. So I've tried to adopt this, to answer your question, I've tried to adopt this as my process now, to say I will still dive into a project ahead of schedule, but I will not commit to an idea until I've let it incubate for a few weeks and I'm working on other things. Whereas an earlier version of me, like when I'd sit down to write a book, as soon as I had the book idea, I would start writing on day one. Now I have the idea, I file it away, and I give myself at least a month before I begin drafting. And I think it feels less productive, but it's far more creative.
What are your thoughts about some of what you described being an unconscious way of seeding the mind and the unconscious with an idea? So, for instance, let's take a school academic scenario where students get an assignment, and the assignment is contained within a folder, and it just says assignment, okay, and it's due on a particular date, and it says due on that particular date, and they're given the folder, but they have no sense of what the assignment is. You can imagine one category of procrastinator that will take that thing and put it down and avoid looking at it entirely, versus another category of procrastinator that will flip it open and take a look at, okay, this is going to be an essay on, I don't know, something about economic theory in the late 1700s. Close it and then procrastinate. There is an idea, which I subscribe to a little bit, because we recently did this series on mental health, not mental illness, but mental health with Dr. Paul Conti, where he talked extensively about the unconscious and how the unconscious mind is always working with ideas, things that we are concerned about, performance, these sorts of things, even if we're not aware of them. What are your thoughts about the creativity that's seeded by slight procrastination being related to actually knowing what you're procrastinating on specifically?
I think it turns out to be, I don't want to say essential, but critical. So one of the things we found is in order for moderate procrastination to fuel creativity, you have to be intrinsically motivated by the thing you're procrastinating on.
Interesting.
And so what happens is if you're bored, for example, by the topic, you're not going to open the folder. You're not going to start thinking about it at all. It's not going to begin. You're not going to do any subconscious processing. You're not going to have any unexpected connections between this topic and something else you've learned about or been curious about. If you're interested in the problem, then when you put it off, you're much more likely to still keep it active in the back of your mind. And that's when you begin to see, I imagine you could explain the biology of this. I imagine, for example, there are probably more neural networks that are connecting. You probably get access to ideas that previously would have been sort of separate nodes. And so I think that you want to know what the topic is, right? You don't want to just see the blank assignment, but you also have to find a reason that this is exciting to you. Otherwise, you're going to avoid it as opposed to letting it percolate.
That brings us to the topic of intrinsic motivation. And I'd like to link that up with the topic of performance. So when I was in university, there were many topics that I was excited to learn about, some more than others, of course. But occasionally I'd be in a class or I'd get an assignment that frankly I had minimal interest in. Never zero, but minimal interest. And as a way of dealing with that, I embarked on a process of literally lying to myself and just telling myself, okay, I'm super interested in reading this and I'm going to force myself to be interested in reading it. And lo and behold, I would start falling in love with certain things. Maybe it was even the arrival of a word that I didn't recognize. And then I would go look it up, and I knew I was studying for the GRE at that time, so I filed that away. I still have my notebooks of all the vocabulary words that I learned in the course of my university courses that frankly made the verbal portion of the GRE look pretty easy, which if you ever try and study for that at the end, it's pretty tough to commit all those new words to memory and context. So I could find little hooks, and through those hooks, I could kind of ratchet my way into a larger interest, and then lo and behold, I'm really interested in Greek mythology, or I actually liked that one at first, but I didn't have to trick myself. But, maybe we could spend a little bit of time talking about what is true intrinsic motivation. Is it always reflexive? Can we make ourselves intrinsically motivated about a given topic or scenario or group of people. And then let's talk about how intrinsic motivation links to performance, because there's a rich literature on this, as I recall. And I remember, the Stanford study of rewarding kids for things they were already intrinsically motivated to do. Maybe we could touch on that a little bit and remind people who haven't heard about it. But I'm fascinated by this topic because I feel like so much of life is about doing things that initially we don't feel that excited to do.
Yeah.
And yet succeeding in life, until you can afford to offload your administrative work to somebody else, which hopefully by now you have.
Find a way to get it done.
Right. This is fundamental to being a functional human being, frankly. Not just successful, in air quotes, but functional. We got to do stuff that we don't enjoy doing.
Yeah, so I think we can talk about a couple different ways to nurture intrinsic motivation. We can think about how the task itself is designed. We can think about reward systems, and then we can think about also the things we say to ourselves and others, which I hope are not lies, but rather persuasive attempts. Let's start on that one, actually. I don't know a lot of people who are that good at deliberate self-deception.
Well, I like to think it was only around a particular set of goal-motivated pursuits. But at that time for me also, it was survival. As I mentioned, I didn't do well in high school. I really wanted to perform well in university, but I knew that working just for the grade wasn't going to carry me. It felt catabolic. And I don't know, maybe at that age I was still in the window of heightened neuroplasticity. We know it never closes, but I think I also fell in love with the process of learning how to do what I just described.
Yeah. So I think for most people, the best method of self-persuasion is actually to convince somebody else. So I'm thinking of Elliot Aronson's classic research on cognitive dissonance, where he would ask you to go and tell somebody else a task you hated is really interesting. And if he paid you a lot to do it, you still hated the task because you had a justification. Like, I got $20 to kind of fib a little bit about this task. The task is bad, but I did it for the payment. When he paid you $1 to go and tell somebody that you loved a task that you didn't, you ended up liking it more.
Wow. And maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but maybe you should tell me why I shouldn't be surprised. Because I hope people got what you just said very clearly. If they didn't, if you don't like doing something, going and reporting to somebody else how great that thing is, so lying about it to somebody else, is one way to increase the degree to which you like or enjoy that behavior or topic. And if you're paid $20 to go lie to somebody in the positive direction, so against your true belief, it's less effective in shifting your underlying affect about that thing, your emotions, than if you're paid less, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Now, I think obviously in the experiment, lying was an easy way to show the effect. But in real life, I think the way that you want to apply this is to say, all right, I've got to find something about this task that's interesting to me. And then in the process of explaining it to somebody else, I'm going to convince myself because I'm hearing the argument from somebody I already like and trust. And I've also chosen the reasons that I find compelling as opposed to hearing somebody else's reasons. And so I think this goes to the point that you were making, which is if you're trying to find a hook to make a topic intriguing, you've got to figure out, okay, what is it that would make this fascinating to me? And in a lot of cases, what you're looking for is a curiosity gap. I think social scientists like to talk about curiosity as an itch that you have to scratch. So there's something you want to know, you don't know it yet. So I would say, I tell my students often, like, take your least favorite class and find a mystery or a puzzle, like something that you just do not know the answer to. I've talked with our kids about this. Like, what really happened to King Tut? Do you know? Can you get to the bottom of that? And all of a sudden, you're like, I wonder. I need to Google it. And then I need to see if Wikipedia has credible information on this. And the more you learn about that, the more intriguing it becomes. And I think that's the beginning of the process of finding intrinsic motivation.
I see. So inherent in your answer is the idea that there's something wired into our neural circuits and therefore psychology that curiosity as a verb, the act of being curious and seeking information, and I should say, I define curiosity, and hopefully you'll disagree with me or agree. Either way, it doesn't matter as long as we can get a bit deeper understanding. I define curiosity as a desire to find something out where you are not attached to a particular outcome.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, in psychology, it's typically defined as just wanting to know. And that means you're driven by the question, not a particular answer, which is exactly what you're driving at.
Okay, great. So, and I think it was Dorothy Parker that said, the cure for boredom is curiosity. There's no cure for curiosity.
As there shouldn't be a cure for curiosity.
Right. So, and by the way, folks, we don't know what neural circuits subserve curiosity in the brain. It's got to be a distributed network. There's no brain area for curiosity, but it's got to be linked up with the reward systems of dopamine, et cetera, in some way, because when one discovers something new that satisfies some curiosity, it's clearly there's a internal reward there. Okay, let me back up. So if your child or an adult is dreading exploring a topic or going about an assignment of any kind, you will give them a question that they then need to resolve. What if the assignment is like rake the leaves off the front lawn? Do you say, count the leaves? Or, I mean, how does one get past the sort of procrastination and generate some intrinsic motivation for things that one dreads, where it's unlikely that they're going to discover some knowledge that's exceedingly useful for future?
You always start with okay, what's the first experiment I can run? Find the most interesting looking leaf for your favorite leaf, and then that lasts for about 2 minutes, and like, okay, now what? We still have a lot of leaves there.
Right.
I think not all tasks can be made intrinsically motivating to everyone. And so when intrinsic motivation is difficult to find, what you want to substitute with is a sense of purpose. Maybe a better way to say that is when the process is not interesting to you, you need to find a meaningful outcome. So there's some research on the boring but important effect, where kids who have a purpose for learning, this goes through high school, and think, this is not just interesting to me, but I'm going to be able to use this knowledge to help other people one day. They're more persistent in their studying. They end up getting better grades. And so I think intrinsic motivation is often driven by curiosity about the how. A sense of purpose comes from really thinking hard about the why. Why does this matter? And so I'd say with the raking leaves, let's try to connect that task to something else that you care about. Are you going to pleasantly surprise your parents when they get home? Are you going to have a place to play soccer that you didn't before? And I think then the process of getting to that, I guess what I'd say is, like, if you're trying to motivate yourself, it's a little bit harder than if you're trying to motivate somebody else on this. If I was going to motivate somebody else, I would take a page out of the motivational interviewing playbook, where I would say, okay, Andrew, actually, let's play this out for a second. So you're going to rake a pile of leaves. It's a 2-hour task. 0 to 10, how excited are you about that?
A 3.
3? Really?
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised. I thought you were going to say 0 or 1. Why is it not lower?
I like any sort of physical activity because it allows me to move, and I just like moving my body.
There we go. Okay, so you just identified a potential source of purpose for that activity. And I don't have a vested interest in convincing you to do this task. I am genuinely curious about what would motivate you to want to do it. And as you start to articulate it, boom, self-persuasion kicks in.
Love it. I'm going to start using these approaches.
Try it at your own risk.
As we all know, quality nutrition influences, of course, our physical health, but also our mental health and our cognitive functioning, our memory, our ability to learn new things and to focus. And we know that one of the most important features of high quality nutrition is making sure that we get enough vitamins and minerals from high quality, unprocessed or minimally processed sources, as well as enough probiotics and prebiotics and fiber to support basically all the cellular functions in our body, including the gut microbiome. Now, I, like most everybody, try to get optimal nutrition from whole foods, ideally mostly from minimally processed or non-processed foods. However, one of the challenges that I and so many other people face is getting enough servings of high-quality fruits and vegetables per day, as well as fiber and probiotics that often accompany those fruits and vegetables. That's why way back in 2012, long before I ever had a podcast, I started drinking AG1. And so I'm delighted that AG1 is sponsoring the Huberman Lab podcast. The reason I started taking AG1 and the reason I still drink AG1 once or twice a day is that it provides all of my foundational nutritional needs. That is, it provides insurance that I get the proper amounts of those vitamins, minerals, probiotics, and fiber to ensure optimal mental health, physical health, and performance. If you'd like to try AG1, you can go to drinkag1.com/Huberman to claim a special offer. they're giving away 5 free travel packs plus a year's supply of vitamin D3 K2. Again, that's drinkag1.com/Huberman to claim that special offer.
I have a question about extrinsic motivation. So if we grow up being incentivized by extrinsic things, you'll get your allowance if you blank. You can spend the money that you make and, on your paper route doing the things you really want to do. Is there any value in those kinds of learning-based incentives for kids and for adults? Because, that's the real world as well. I know plenty of people. I have family members that only work for a paycheck, and they're pretty okay because they like spending their paycheck.
Yeah.
Probably more than I'm not intrinsically attached to money. I certainly have needs in life, but I don't enjoy spending money for the sake of spending it or for gaining more possessions. But I know people that do, and I certainly don't judge. Are they somehow existing in a diminished landscape of happiness, or because they seem pretty happy to me, but they seem to have also worked out this relationship. They do certain things to get the extrinsic rewards, and they really enjoy what they can do with those extrinsic rewards.
There's a huge body of evidence on what are the effects of extrinsic rewards on motivation and performance. And I think the latest conclusions, if you look at the latest meta-analyses, so huge study of studies trying to accumulate what's the average effect of adding a financial incentive to a task that wasn't incentivized before, or to a job where you were paid salary and now we're going to give you incentive compensation. There is a boost. So in general, people are more productive when they're incentivized for their output, but these incentives are better for motivating quantity than quality. So you see people get more done, but they're not necessarily more careful or more thorough.
Are they less careful and less thorough?
No, actually, there's still positive effects on average. They're just weaker. And of course, you could then start to say, well, how do I incentivize, being fast and careful? Mm-hmm. But I think where we do have to be really cautious is there's an undermining effect of extrinsic rewards on intrinsic motivation. And you were alluding to this earlier, dating back to the early 70s, where we know that if we take an interesting task and then we pay you for it, you might conclude that you're only doing it for the outcome and you lose interest in the task. So the classic demonstration, Mark Lepper and colleagues, is kids playing video games. And they're playing them because they're fun. And then you start to add in an incentive. And then when the incentive's taken away, they don't want to play anymore because the meaning of the task has changed. And now I'm doing it because I want to get something out of it, as opposed to I love the process. I think that phenomenon does not have to exist. So we know, for example, at work, if managers, as long as they give people autonomy, they don't present the rewards in a controlling way. So instead of saying, Andrew, in order to earn this, you need to do the following work. If they say, hey, look, I'd really love it if you would deliver the following, and in order to make that worth your while, I'm offering this incentive. People react very differently when they have a sense of choice and control. So I think that's, I guess, the starting point. In the presence of autonomy, I don't think there's a major downside of extrinsic rewards. I think you also have to be careful that, I guess that you're not over justifying the task. In other words, you're not swamping people's intrinsic reason for doing it, but you're adding a reason to try it. So actually, if we go to a different domain for a second, so look at kids who don't want to eat their vegetables. Extrinsic incentives are very effective to get kids to try vegetables for the first time. But then the hope is that they discover a vegetable or two that they don't mind, and then they find reasons to keep doing it. And I think that's how I want a lot of rewards to work. I don't think that rewards should be carrots that we dangle to try to control people's behavior. I think they should be symbols of how much we appreciate and value a particular behavior. And if you frame them that way, it's a lot easier for people to say, yeah, you know what? That reward is something that I really want, but I'm not only doing the task for that reward.
Yeah, that you basically answered the question I was going to ask, which is, and at risk of sounding new agey, but we are sitting in California. I could imagine that when one is focused on the extrinsic rewards, so a physical task or a cognitive task for an extrinsic reward, if I'm focusing on the extrinsic reward, I'm also, air quotes again, not present,
right? I'm thinking about the outcome. I'm not thinking about process. And I think perhaps you can flesh out some of what this is exactly, but I think there's a fairly extensive data to support the idea that when we are physically and mentally present to the task, that we're going to perform better. And presumably our intrinsic liking of that task or performing that task increases as well. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. If we want to break down the mechanisms for why intrinsic motivation is useful for performance, one you touched on earlier, it's focus of attention. It's much easier to find flow when you're intrinsically motivated. You get into that state of deep absorption where time melts away. So you mentioned, sort of either speeding up or slowing down your sense of time. You forget where you are. Sometimes you even lose track of your identity, and you're just merged into the task. And so that concentration is helpful. There's also a greater persistence effect, that when you enjoy what you're doing, you're less likely to give up in the face of obstacles. You're more likely to think about it when you're not doing the task and come up with great ideas. And so, I think there's a working harder, there's a working longer, there's a working smarter, and there's also a thinking more clearly effect.
This is a brief but related tangent. One of the things that I've found incredibly difficult in recent years is that, most of my life, really since I was a small kid, I was foraging for things. And then, I used to give lectures on Monday in class if they let me, until they eventually stopped me, about the stuff I was reading about all weekend. So got an early start and then on the professorial front. But now, if I'm reading something and I discover what I think is a really valuable piece of information, or a tool or a protocol, I'm like, wow, this is really cool. These findings are so cool. There's a problem, which is that now I have an opportunity to cast that out to the world through social media. We all do. This could be.
Wait, I'm sorry. You're on social media?
From time to time.
You're all over my feeds.
You and I both do our own social media, by the way, which I really appreciate. I think one can always detect if someone else is handling someone's social media. So yes, I'm on social media, and I love that I have the opportunity to both send out ideas and information and also receive feedback. I really love the comment section. And always encourage comments. I learn from it, frankly.
Love is a strong word.
I learned from it, and you and I were weaned in the academic culture where, frankly, the kind of hazing that one receives in academic culture is very different than the kind of hazing that one receives on social media. But let's just say that if you come up through academia, you develop a pretty thick skin.
I agree with that. I do have to say, though, that there was a part of me that was really surprised when I started posting on social that I love constructive criticism. I was unprepared for the number of people who will knee-jerk criticize a study without even looking at whether the methods are rigorous.
Right.
I'm like, come on, if I posted this, surely it's at least worth considering the possibility that there's strong evidence behind it.
Right. Well, that's where a brief, I won't call it a retort, but a response of, clearly you should read the study further because I think you'll be satisfied with the answer or something. I don't know. But I agree. It can be a little bit harsh in there sometimes. But, the social media channels are, I think, it's a double-edged blade. They obviously have their issues, but can be a wonderful opportunity to share information and share it quickly. The problem is that it takes me out of what I was doing initially, which was learning, searching for those gems with which to share later. And I think there's a broader landscape to consider this, where people, for instance, are. I was at the beach yesterday. It was just absolutely spectacular day at the beach, especially for this time of year. And everyone was taking pictures of that experience on their phone and probably sharing that experience either social media or with friends. This is very different than taking a photograph and not seeing that photograph until later or not sending it out. And so there are now near infinite number of circumstances where we are taken out of the rewarding experience. I should rephrase that. We are taking ourselves out of the rewarding experience and focusing on a different rewarding experience that I think by definition is an extrinsic reward. So we are taking ourselves out of our intrinsically rewarding experiences and activating these extrinsic rewards. And do you think in any way that's undermining our experience of things that we really enjoy? Again, not to demonize social media or these channels, but I've personally found it difficult to refrain from sharing this knowledge that I'm so excited to share, but I deliberately delay. And there's I have a deep list of folders full of things that I want to post, but I'm just doing it,
systematically over time, because I really fight the temptation to do this, mostly because I want to continue to enjoy this learning process and this seeking process so much.
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel torn. I think it was E.B. White who said, I rise in the morning torn between the desire to enjoy the world and the desire to improve the world. And this makes it difficult to plan the day. And I feel that every day. I felt it this morning. I was like, okay, it's time to leave to come to the Huberman podcast. I'm like, wait, but I didn't hit my minimum sunlight viewing. So what do I do? Do I show up on time for you, or do I meet your criteria?
The explanation, I was getting my morning sunlight and therefore I'm X number of minutes or even hours late, would have been completely fine.
I figured
with
as
me.
much.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
That's a
Yeah.
built-in acceptable excuse with you. I think everybody experiences a version of this, and it's definitely gotten worse with social media and with smartphones. I think so. One of the most startling data points for me was Gloria Mark first put this on my radar. Before COVID, the average person was checking email 72 times a day. How do you ever concentrate for more than a couple minutes if you're self-interrupting that often? You can't. Brigitte Schulte has a great term for this. She calls it time confetti. And she says, we're taking these meaningful blocks of time and we're slicing them up into these like tiny little dots of confetti. And not only can we not accomplish anything, we're also eroding our own sense of joy, because it's really hard to enjoy the 30-second blip of time that you get on a task. And I think we know a lot more about the existence of these problems than how to solve them. But one thing we do know is blocking out uninterrupted time is meaningful. There's a great Leslie Perlow experiment where she takes engineers and she has them, she sets a quiet time policy. No interruptions Tuesday, Thursday, Friday before noon. 65% above average productivity.
Could you repeat the protocol again?
Yeah, so quiet time, there are a couple iterations of it, but I think the most effective one was Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, no meetings, no interruptions, no Slack, no emails before noon.
And during those periods of no interruptions, one could tend to whatever their primary purpose is at work.
Yeah, you
right?
have
So for me, it might be podcasting. Obviously, I don't have my phone in here and never do. But it doesn't mean no interaction with anyone else. It just means focusing on the major tasks.
The task, exactly. And you come in with a clear sense of priority and purpose. And I don't think there's anything magical about Tuesday, Thursday, Friday before noon. It's just the idea of setting a boundary and collectively committing to it that seems to be important. And I think, when I think about this, I'd be really curious about your take on chronotypes here, because I think one thing I've learned in the last couple of years is that if you're a morning person, you do your best analytical and creative thinking in the morning, and so the quiet time block would work very well for me as a morning person. If you're a night owl, you probably want that block in the late afternoon. And I was encouraged. There was some evidence during COVID that people have their best meetings right after lunch. That they're something like 30% less likely to multitask in an after lunch meeting. And I guess you could probably unpack the food coma, getting re-energized by other people. But it's led me to wonder if we should all be protecting the first few hours and the last few hours of the day for deep work, and then doing our core meetings and interactions and kind of off-task activities in the middle. What do you think about that as a sequence?
Yeah, well, I have a lot of questions about this for you, but I love that sequence. It certainly fits with my natural rhythms. I think there's ample evidence to support the fact that provided one is sleeping well at night and is on a more or less a standard schedule. When I say standard, I mean going to bed somewhere between, let's say, 9:30 and 11:30 p.m., waking up sometime between, let's say, 6 a.m. and 8 a.m., maybe 5:30 to 7:30, something like that. So not highly unusual night owl or super early bird. For people that are following that sort of schedule, the first, let's just say from 0 to 8 hours after waking, there tends to be a fairly robust increase in all the catecholamines, so dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, which generally speaking, lead to increases in alertness, attention, and focus that are great for analytic work, great for implementation of strategies that you already understand, and you need to churn through a lot of stuff. And of course, there's a big increase in the morning, especially if you view morning sunlight
a healthy increase, I should say, in cortisol. Cortisol is not bad, folks. You want cortisol, but you want that peak early in the day. We know that. Okay, so for most people, it seems, at least my understanding is that that period of time, 0 to 8 or 8 hours after waking or so, is best devoted to the quote unquote most critical tasks. But one of the common problems is that people take that ability to implement a known strategy and they start battering back all the emails, or talking to all. By the way, talking to coworkers is great and it's often required, but it's what the question is whether or not it's productive conversation or whether or not it's just conversation. And we tend to have a lot of energy early in the day, and I'm obsessed with the idea of neural energy as opposed to just caloric energy. So there we're talking about neural energy, and then post lunch. So really, as we get to the sort of 9 to 17 hours after waking, there is a dip in autonomic arousal that during the middle of the day, the postprandial dip. There's a post-lunch sleepiness that can be partially offset by delaying your morning caffeine a bit if you have the afternoon crash. But it's interesting that you know that more productive meetings and less task switching and distraction occurred in meetings set after lunch, because that makes me think that perhaps being a little bit less alert is going to lend itself to more focus. And indeed, that's the sort of optimal state, relaxed but focused. You're not sleepy, but you also don't have so much intrinsic energy that you're
Bouncing
tending
off the
to a bunch
walls.
of things.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people do feel that way. And I'm drinking double espresso right now, late morning, and I can sit still, but I think certain Zoom meetings, how do I say this? I don't want to offend any of my colleagues. I mean, they are boring enough. They are not content rich enough to grab all my attention. And nowadays, of course, there are multiple screens. Typically, I've got 2 phones and a computer, and you have to really spend some work to flip over those phones while I'm on a Zoom and things like that.
Why? What's going on? Are you sure I'm actually bastard to kill these guys? I don't feel alright. What the fuck? That was on me, man. Click on it. I wouldn't have to. Click the bed. Are you sure? What? Man. How's he stuff? Maybe I'm just low health. Did I just get nerfed? What the hell's going on? I thought there was a buff you have fast and farming. Kill him. Where's their fucking Mia, dude? What is that? What is going on? There's so many things. Why is there a little fucking... What is that? Why am I so weak? Piste. Why is Alucard so weak? What is going on? Bro. This is some bullshit. Guys, please. Man, I'm seriously weak. Or I don't know, is it just me? What the fuck? What the hell? Even ping is in their side, bro. Even ping is in their side, bro. How do you compete to that? Yeah. I know. No, I cannot. I hate you guys so much. So much. Okay, okay, we're winning, but that doesn't mean I'm weak. It's just because they're stupid. This is epic. The hell, man. Where's everybody? What the fuck? Okay, guys. Well, at least we got 2 towers, whatever. Man, these guys suck. Like, for real suck, dude. Oh my lord. To be fair, I keep dying. I'm the one who keeps dying. But like I said, it's because I'm weak. Are you? I hate this meme, man. I hate this meme so much. Guys, what are you doing? Like literally. I'm your fucking carry, you assholes. It's epic, man. What do you expect? What do you expect? Anyways, I thought I got buffed, dude, because like I saw the patch notes. It says that I found like 20, I don't know, 10% faster. I don't know. I forgot. Dude, the fuck? The hell y'all? The hell y'all do? Also, report not using the intended role. You piece of shit. There's a new hero too. What the fuck? What is that? Why is that a word now? What? What the hell? What? What is dinosaurs, man? What the fuck is going on? It's not like I quit for a very long time too. Like it's just a fucking week or something. The hell? Whatever, man. I'm installing.
The cursing accents threatening the judge handling his case. One made the cursing act and threatening the judge handling his case. Johnny's one made mission to self-destruct, and as this race, it would be long before the brain sitting over a brain, but possibly the judge Johnny has a edition. The last time I talked about him, he was claiming to be a conscious of evil, someone who's willing to do whatever it is ask him, as long as they give him money.
If you want to see anarchy, you're an anarchist, and you want something that's going to crash out with no remorse, with no sense of self, with no self-sense of self-determination. I will be your man.
Unfortunately for everyone else, he wasn't lying. He's since spiraled into even further degeneracy, willing to cross any moral line, just so anything of social relevancy has left. And if that wasn't bad enough, the Korean authorities are now investigating him for a crime so disgusting, it overshadows everything else he's done so far.
Ramsey is under police. He is an innocent of prosecution. Serious consideration of child.
Hi, I'm Ian Sanders. I create weekly YouTube documentaries, and today we're taking yet another look at the train wreck that is John Samal, how he somehow found a way to sink even lower than before, and in a twist that defies all logic, how his violent actions have paradoxically paving the way for a better reality everywhere else. But until that positive change happens, everyone is stuck dealing with a guy like Johnny, who decided that he wasn't charged with enough crime already, and started harassing other streamers to add one more offense to his name. He streams like the creator known as Slightly Homeless, and approached him without warning, just to be a part of his content. Slightly Homeless knew exactly who Johnny was and wanted no part of it, but when he tried to walk away, Johnny began chasing him through the streets like a lunatic. From there, he kept street signing Slightly Homeless to find his location and show up wherever he went, all while harassing Slightly Homeless' girlfriend, a Japanese streamer, Nana, as well. When they refused to entertain his stalking, he went full maniac mode and started filming extremely inappropriate derogatory terms at Nana. The only way they got away from Johnny was by taking shelter in a police station. Something Johnny responded to by threatening to slap Nana and stalked her again the next day.
Fortunately, they managed to file a police report, resulting in Johnny getting slapped with yet another misdemeanor. However, this didn't really stop Johnny, since in his mind, he's done nothing wrong. Congratulations. That's awesome. Congratulations. Judy's completely insane because he's slowly realizing his actions actually have consequences. He even doubles down, went to a convenience store, and started blaring loud music, disrupting their business. Mind you, this is the second crime he's already being charged for already. Then, after getting home, he called the local police department to discuss the reports slightly homeless filed against him, and when that overcame, he tried to claim that the report was false. As if the police would just believe their word and stop the case immediately, though maybe he genuinely believed something like this would happen, because when this didn't, he became furious and started cursing the officer on the phone. Shut the fuck up. And as if that wasn't enough, the very next day he was out on the street, twerking in nothing but his boxes.
And that is depressing. Anyways, where am I? I think I did flat bench and then I stopped. So like, oh my god, it's already time. So I guess I didn't really do much. What do you want? Oh yeah, fuck. Yeah, I'm just gonna finish my concept. Yeah. Good, good. Yeah, chicken legs, chicken legs. Chicken legs. Still. And then this big ass fat gourd. Know what I mean? Yeah, that's fine, right? Yeah.
So
Sorry,
maybe
what
it's,
were you saying? I
so
wasn't listening.
so it's maybe the reduction in autonomic arousal that supports what you just described, but I don't know. My thinking, or my understanding rather, was that creative work and kind of brainstorming was best accomplished in the late afternoon. I've noticed when lecturing, I'd be curious what your experience is with in university lectures when I held courses in the evening. I used to like to hold my courses 5 to 7 p.m. or even 7 to 9:30 p.m. when I was teaching undergraduates, that people were much looser and more relaxed. And I always thought that might have something to do with an increase in GABA transmission that's known to happen in the late evening, that people are just kind of more relaxed and less social anxiety. They've been around people for much of the day. Anyway, I send back more reflections than answers. I don't have any firm neuroscience explanations for what you described, but there are some emerging theories about how it might work, and it has this 0 to 9 hours, phase 1, 9 to 17 hours, phase 2, and then of course from 17 to 24 hours, I'll call it phase 3, you should be asleep.
Yeah.
Ideally.
Well, I think there's a confound in your teaching experience, which is undergrads often sleep in until noon, or
True.
they might be up until 4 a.m.
Or at least 10 a.m. seems to be a typical rise time for the
Yes.
undergrad.
So a morning class might be too early for them to be fully awake. But there's some brand new evidence that at least on creativity at work, I read a series of, I think it was 3 studies recently, showing that early birds actually did do more creative work in the morning. And in part, I think again, I don't think any neuroscientist has touched the mechanisms on this yet. But in terms of the psychological processes, early on, there seems to be a benefit of the energy level, and some of that energy leads to more divergent thinking. And later, if you're a morning person, you might lose the ability to diverge quite as much, and so you end up in a more conventional space of thought. Does that track at all with your understanding of how it might play out in the brain?
My understanding is it would be a little bit it would be individual, but there is something to these liminal states between sleep and waking. So maybe we can wrap a convenient bow around what I said and what you just said, which is that we know that in the transition states into and out of sleep, and it doesn't necessarily have to be within the first half hour in and out of sleep, that there seems to be more divergent thinking, or at least activation of neural networks that are not as constrained as one observes when they're in a sheer task and strategy implementation mode, right? I mean, I think
Is that similar to the shower effect?
the shower effect. So people have ideas in the shower or while running or while falling asleep, or my best ideas always come within the first hour after waking. That's why I carry a notebook around, and much to the dismay of people in my life, oftentimes I don't want to hear or talk to anyone first thing in the morning. This is problematic, and I had to make adjustments. We'll talk about adjustments between productivity and control and family interactions. This is something I know you've worked on and written about. But those liminal states are interesting, and I'd love your thoughts on this. I've had several guests on this podcast talk about their creative process, namely Rick Rubin. He's famous for his work in music producing, also has a great podcast, Tetragrammaton, as well as Carl Deisroth, a colleague of mine, who's really in the 0.0001% of super talented bioengineers, neuroscientists, who also happens to be a full-time clinical psychiatrist and has 5 children. Okay. And I asked them about their creative process, because both of them are very creative. Carl's process involves the following. Late at night for him, but it could really be any time of day, deliberately making his body as still as possible and forcing himself to think in complete sentences. Rick's creative process, although it includes a lot of different things, has a lot to do with also getting very still, lying down. Okay, other folks that I've spoken to, academics and artists, have referred to getting their body into motion but quieting their mind. So these are 2 opposite processes. In one case, the body is still, but the mind is deliberately very active. In the other scenario, the body is very active, but they're making their mind sort of in free association. Not still, but they're not deliberately thinking about any one thing.
Fascinating.
And I'm obsessed with this. Maybe you and I could work on this. I'm due for a sabbatical. Maybe we could figure this out, because
I've never seen anyone study this before.
Right, because the nervous system, the nervous system, I'm not aware of anyone has done it formally either. The nervous system, of course, is a brain-body phenomenon. And so what happens when we sort of cut off the deliberate operations of brain or body, and it doesn't seem to matter whether or not it's brain or body, as long as one is deliberately shut off. And so anyway, I'd love your thoughts on this. I don't consider myself like an ultra creative or creative type to any great degree, but
Me neither. That's why.
but I'm
that's why
fascinated.
I've been
Right, but I'm
doing it.
right, but I'm fascinated by these deliberate tactics that highly creative people have undertaken. in order to bring about ideas. I certainly have some of my best ideas when I'm running, and I'll just be running along like, my goodness, I wasn't even thinking. Now I need to write this down, okay, and then continue. I tried the Diceroth approach and the Rubin approach. I actually just spent a week with Rick overseas, and indeed he spends a lot of time just still thinking, and it's a very hard practice to get consistent with.
I wonder if there are individual differences here on which needs to be stable or steady. I'm thinking about a huge part of creativity is overriding your default instincts. And if you're somebody whose default is to have your mind constantly going, then quieting would probably shift your train of thought to something more original or unconventional. The opposite might be true. If you have a naturally quiet mind, I would imagine you need to sort of jolt yourself out of that with lots of access to free-ranging thoughts. And so it'd be interesting actually to study whether we can predict what you should still based on your personality.
Yeah, and maybe what we could do with that study, I think we have a collaboration brewing. There's a joke, two scientists walk into a room and what comes out is a collaboration. So I'd want to put people in a scanner. It's hard to get people treadmilling in a scanner because of movement artifact, and just look at resting network activation and compare that to resting network activation when people are completely still and forcing themselves to think in deliberate sentences, and then look at the overlap in that Venn diagram. That's what's of interest to me. They may be completely different brain states. They might actually have more similarity than differences.
I wonder then if you can tie that to differences in the quality and quantity of output. So I would imagine that one of the benefits of either kind of movement is that you end up increasing the volume of ideas, which we know is good for variety and ultimately increases the probability that you stumble onto something new. But then I think the being still part is probably better for the filtering process I think one of the hardest parts of creativity is actually judging your own ideas. Most creative people have many terrible ideas. In fact, the most creative people have the most horrible ideas because they just have a lot of ideas. And I think that maybe there's a way in which quieting either your body or your mind allows you to gain some distance from the idea and see whether it's boneheaded or promising.
I'd like to take a quick break and thank our sponsor, Inside Tracker. Inside Tracker is a personalized nutrition platform that analyzes data from your blood and DNA to help you better understand your body and help you reach your health goals. I've long been a believer in getting regular blood work done for the simple reason that many of the factors that impact your immediate and long-term health can only be analyzed from a quality blood test. Now, a major problem with a lot of blood tests out there, however, is that you get information back about metabolic factors, lipids, and hormones, and so forth, but you don't know what to do with that information. With Inside Tracker, they make it very easy because they have a personalized platform that allows you to see the levels of all those things, metabolic factors, lipids, hormones, etc., but it gives you specific directives that you can follow that relate to nutrition, behavioral modification, supplements, etc., that can help you bring those numbers into the ranges that are optimal for you. If you'd like to try Inside Tracker, go to insidetracker.com/Huberman. As a Cyber Monday sale, which will include Monday, November 27th and Tuesday, November 28th, Inside Tracker is offering 50% off their full website. Again, that's insidetracker.com/Huberman.
Along those lines, when one is trying to gauge the quality of their ideas, how do you cope with, or how does one cope with not placing a judge on that causes some false negatives where you're wiping out great ideas? Because Rick Rubin talks a lot about don't give the audience what they want. They don't know what they want. They haven't seen it yet. If it's a truly creative idea, they haven't seen it. And but of course we all have to develop our own sense of taste. So how does this process work for you? I mean, you've written about and worked on a tremendous range of topics, and always I must say with such rigor and such clarity of communication about those topics. Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, like 100%. So we say around here, no weak sauce, and
That's a great phrase.
There's no weak sauce in your game. It's incredible. So when do you get your ideas and how do you filter those ideas?
I feel like the when could be any time. I think you've clearly experienced this too. For me, the best thing about hosting a podcast is I have an excuse to learn about anything I want from almost anyone I want, and I get to call that part of my job. And so I feel like that having that built-in mechanism for learning means ideas could come at any moment. The filtering process for me is it's evolved over the last few years. What I do now is, if let's say I'm starting a new book, I'll write a draft of the first chapter and I send it to 5 to 8 people whose judgment I trust. And by design, some of those people are in my field. They're deep-seated in organizational psychology. Others are very far outside, but curious about the topics I'm interested in. And I ask them for a 0 to 10 score. This is something I learned to do as a springboard diver, where I would take off and I'm doing a few flips or twists, and I think my dive is good, but I can't see it because I'm hurling in midair and everything's a blur. And so I have to rely on my coach to tell me if it was any good. I feel like creative work is the same way. You're too close to it to know how the audience is going to react to it. And yes, you don't want to create it just for the audience, but at the end of the day, you want it to be, interesting or useful to them. So I asked for the 0 to 10, and no one ever says 10. And then I use that as a calibration mechanism. So if everybody is in the 7 or 8 range, I know that I'm onto something promising, and now I need to refine it. If I get a bunch of 2s, 3s, 3.5s, I either need to rethink the idea or dramatically rewrite how I'm.
Streaming. The world cannot stop making things worse for himself. From dancing shirtless in public, then after getting home, it's not the case. Almost unrealistic, all at least. But when the police station was arrested again, he began thinking and started resisting arrest. However, while he was arrested, an officer dropped him back at home just a few hours later, which he was quick to brag about on Discord. What he fails to realize is that the Korean authorities are letting him roam free for a reason. Now, this is just a theory, but according to some rumors, the Korean officials are letting him do whatever he wants on purpose. A fantastic job of incriminating himself, all while live streaming evidence. As a comment on YouTube put it, it's so weird seeing a two-stop throat self-destruction and revel in every moment of discourse. You think that after being humiliated in front of the entire world and being so close to spending the rest of his life behind bars, that he finally learned his lesson. Maybe to lay low for a while, but Johnny keeps on doubling down, even beyond his highest rank are female officers, while he was detained for his obscene shirtless dancing. What makes this even worse, our officers, while he was detained for his obscene shirtless dancing. What makes this even worse is that this is far from the first time he's threatened to SA women. He did the same thing to female officers when he was in Israel.
I'll slap that ass, I'll grab it too. Y'all done choked on me, grab it by the I'll grab that too.
And made even more vile threats against streamer Moxie. Said he does have a 200 IQ plan to avoid jail time, and his plan is to get a bipolar disorder diagnosis so he can plead insanity.
And me and Hank are gonna go to a psychiatrist pretty soon and bring the paperwork. We go to a psychiatrist here in Korea and bring him the paperwork of that. And hopefully, he said he can help my case because I am diagnosed as bipolar 2 in America.
And while mental health can be taken into account during sentencing in South Korean courts, it's unlikely to do Johnny any favors, since he's publicly admitted to doing all the terrible things he does simply for money.
Why are you being racist to other people in the country? Why are you bullying people in the country? For money. Like, for I don't give up. I have no moral. Well, sociopath. I don't give up. homeland. Period. Like, put this in your next YouTube documentary. I don't give a.
But even if you ignore everything he said before getting arrested in Korea, his behavior since then is more than enough to reveal the evil person he truly is. Because when he's not out harassing people on the streets or making disturbing threats towards women, he's on stream and trying to intimidate the Korean government by claiming he'll turn himself into a bioweapon.
I'm telling you right now, it is a danger to the Korean women. I have had so much with Korean women while I've been locked. I don't get any STD test live, and I make sure to spread whatever I have to this Korean.
These threats are obviously nothing more than the idiotic ramblings of a man desperate to create drama. But as many of the internet hope for, maybe the Korean government should take them more seriously. At this point, he's a risk to the public health and safety. That's bioterrorism and could mark him as an enemy of the state. I do hope the Korean police and court system takes this seriously. Hypotheticals aside, it's clear the Korean authorities have no plans to let Johnny walk away scot-free, because, as it turns out, they've launched yet another investigation into his past actions. This time for a crime far more serious than being obnoxious in a store or harassing people on the street.
Here's some new spicy please. This again.
This goes back to when Johnny visited the Lottie World theme park in Seoul. There, he left his Bluetooth speaker on, allowing donors to play any audio they wanted on it. And this was just as disastrous as you might expect. At one point during the stream, while surrounded by families, the text of speech on his speaker started repeating a disgusting Korean phrase, which essentially translates to "I want to have blank with children." Now, you might argue that he doesn't understand the language, so he was completely unaware of what it meant. However, that's argument falls apart quickly when he realized park employees repeatedly begged to turn the speaker off, yet he kept refusing, claiming it was just his quote ringtone.
So I think it's his ringtone. He's not turning it down intentionally. Once again, willful negligence. You don't understand the test. Willful negligence. We're not sure.
If convicted, this alone could add another 10 years to his prison sentence. But even that's not the end of his troubles. His second trial was set for May 16, 2025. And according to reports from people who attended the hearing, he was late yet again. But unlike last time, Johnny Quote did have a smile on his face, which does make sense. Depending on the conviction, he can be sentenced to 36 years in prison. While he's still waiting on the act of being bold and unbothered, he's most likely starting to feel the weight of possibly spending the next few decades in more prison. A good example of this pressure is his change of mind about stimulating Kanye. You see, he initially wanted to show up to court dressed like a KKK bro, similar to Ye. But after talking about his playing police and spending actual money on it, he decided not to wear it at the last minute, knowing Johnny, the only reason he didn't go through with it was because he was scared of extending a sentence even further. And to make matters worse, there's nothing he could gain from being his unhinged self anymore. He's being permanent from high-paying platforms like him. So at this point, he's destroying his life for free. In his own words, it's not worth it anymore. Unfortunately for Johnny, even if he suddenly decides to turn his life around now, it's too little too late. At this point, any regret he shows falls on deaf ears, because no one has any empathy left to give. He only regrets it now because the consequences disappear, and he lost over 30 years anymore in prison, where they don't believe in things like bleeding down and taking parole. He also tried to blame his actions on alcohol.
You know what I mean? Like alcohol is the reason why we free. And it's not because I think I didn't got this that for some person. Like, truly did that for somebody alcohol. That's what he was bringing up.
But much to his dismay, no one's finding an excuse. As a comment on YouTube, it said he still takes zero accountability, now blaming alcohol for it all. What takes her? However, the biggest reason Johnny might be starting to clean up his act is because he's running out of support from all directions. He may find society on everyone care. But what shut down most immediately his parents disowned him. Now the only person who's buying all this time is also starting to feel squeeze. It was begging with a should feel, stating that legal fees are taxing me. If anyone wants to help out with legal fees, please don't. Also, Johnny's a travel ban. Let it work and just give me support. Johnny is out of money now and I'm supporting him. There's no choice. It was my parents. His parents also threatened to stop sending him money since his wasting most without Johnny. And all of this is finally getting to him. All of this is to say, even someone as stubborn as Johnny can't achieve big abuses under these circumstances, which I suspect is why he pleaded not guilty to the two defect charges during the recent trial, as then once extractable with his potential prison sentence. Unfortunately for Johnny, with the many clips of him probably showcasing those videos himself, there's nothing he could say to successfully meet those charges. Though outside the courtroom, Johnny's infamy is starting to have a surprisingly positive impact on the world. As strange as that is, allow me to explain. In the beginning, Johnny's popularity was like in countries like Japan, Korea. People feared that many other abuses IRL trainers would follow in his footsteps and make black feeling over the residents of these countries. While that did happen, it also had an unexpected side effect. Johnny's behavior made it painfully clear that the only real way to deal with these obnoxious streamers is to stand up to them. Now, people are no longer willing to let these streamers do whatever they want. More proactive in arresting foreign streamers when they cause trouble, which can only be a good thing. The only thing left now is for Johnny to get what he deserves. His next trial is set up for August of this year, and from what I've seen, the Korean government is going to make an example out of him. They know that's letting him off with just a slap on the wrist when it sends the wrong message, and an invitation for other streamers like him to do the same. The Korean authorities need to show the world exactly what happens when someone else comes into their country and harass and disrespect their people, Make sure you subscribe to your any updates. Especially story-driven ones. However, when taking big breaks in between things, so I believe first you have to let as much data as possible. Or RTS 50 you or RTS 70. Which all the same like so it's easy to it's less than you with 200 requests per hour, but they're less than a little over 100 60,000, 20,000, and 25,000 from other sources. This one is a little more so it's images. So we're just going to do to trust the data. Yeah, we can use that some detail. So we'll get it before it's almost like give us some more. Also between 5 to 15 that's 11 minutes. For the same 45. So looking at huge. With all the different programs that you use, the use case here is works and use for what you can win an NVIDIA RTX or RTX 5070 GPU. You can go into to see for yourself what you can build with, or you can take this one. So first have to take it and form it to a full version or resolution. Is what with models like this, so we'll use that. We'll go to the those rest you can run it. Those rest it's in front of the solid. So we run it like the well, storage buildings are like so that you can open it up. Easy. So it's really cost 48 months work. It's already Python, that's how you change it. So I think it's out right. A lot of that so some of those things tell you but we're still writing tests really fast. And every time you grab something from the database, you get it. That's the first way for this. So just like your response to questions. And that's there were rules that I needed to tweak, like for example, the output. So we get to that, you just wrap the way that the user already focused on, and then take a screenshot. Towards the head, if you just some different things like all you need with like screenshot. Oh, like that, you can word inside each different word window, and screenshot as if they were taking guys enjoy something and work that way. So overall, I think the application experience, especially considering the next time position. We're going to get automation to the link below. It's the finance, it's the automation, it's something, but that's being really about smart work. It's aimed at you, my finance, it's playing with right away. So if you create that below for all the bonus, you also obviously have over Discord channel, there's a dedicated Jesus like the channel, how to do your creations and Jesus conversations with the effort. Simple feature in Google Tasks, but it didn't exist. And looks of it, it wasn't ever going to exist. So I built it myself. That's all we're going to do. Google Calendar, it's stable ring, right? It's got Google Tasks. So yeah, cool. If you see my videos, what we're going to be, right? It's something that's so basically it's anyone to do work so basically it's like that's seems to want to do that browser which see I think suggesting this feature so Google form so we're building it ourselves so here's what we're going to build keywords this will allow you to type something let's go. Oh, let's go. Small start to make video. If you've seen my videos, you know how often I do small start just like go but what makes it great for developers is the debugger, which is able to the lines running console and it's like some line code and also for the small features like the button keys or info blocks and keys tags, which you'll see why this is not a lifesaver later on this video. Unfortunately, if you want to learn or become the better developer, then check out Google and check out for sponsor this channel. Something that runs. They use their operating systems for an actual browser. So let's look at well, my software breaks a lot, as you've seen in my videos. These listed here, so that I can just user experience. Also, other things that I go as well. Also, just from the links. Also, cool. Okay, let's I want the cool. Okay, Flex as a TypeScript or Python developer, right? On the list, I love working with the web. So using TypeScript is going to make this look really professional. I'm really excited. So here's my file. So pro tip for all you code developers, it's an executable template, executable over, and you provide the for you anyway. So the way it works is that it brings all the functions that you want to on start. So if I want to do like a search service, I'm going to put it here, as well as a service here. Let's say the demo. I just want to include it. Start off with two other services as well. Just finish off this video. I want to follow this build button, click button, second screen. It's just like the service. One like Windows, pop up or the next thing. Spotlight. Swap for a second here. Let's get to some Google APIs before you start processing in the middle. I want to see if we can just hit on the other side. So the good news is that you can just use Google's API find Go. It's Google APIs and scary to use. I won't pretend this is Google's this version of the software. It's a little G-Cloud console. Oh, I'll set up next to my incredible programming skills as a text engineer. Okay, if you can smart me, again, this is my first video. Anyway, here's what we do that. This one now. Go show the test. I see here that this test has a lot of assignment info, deleted, etc. Our title still build process out, but yeah, it's a lot, especially when you want to start sorting things. HFW yields processing or post processing method. It has help taking a paper. Just like use the structure element. It's like your teacher. This is the basic thing. String and certain categories. These categories being date, description, short version of the task, intent. Now here's a little point. Specifically, struct tags. We know what a struct is. You know, this little object definition. Like we're just with JSON and serialized or key and valid. That's what this looks like. Personally, I hate writing it and I hate looking at it too. Two types of programmers, and I believe that every single programmer can fit in between these two types. From influencers all the way to your open source contributors. So on one side of the spectrum, we have the craft-based programmer, and some key traits include character, volume, and maintainability. While some of those most social things, these are time and really feel success and when something on the road is how to have a craft programmer. See the craft-based programmers as open source maintainers, low-level programmers, code reviewers, etc. The level of your nose into this profession is often extremely selfless and goes unnoticed. If you have such passion towards the craft of programming, you want to be able to find the possible solutions and make sure the code you're writing to most important. An example from the itself, Linus Torvalds. After getting important for writing code, Linus got overly complex code was it's just stupid new GCC header, file crap. Smith says that the crap is for completely bogus reasons. I mean, maybe annoyed is an understatement. There's a lot of programmers that are like this, but we'll come back to second. On the opposite side, we have the result-based programmer. What's the most fastest developed solution? Can be experimental and latest technologies. To use existing solutions online and test out what the programmer needs. And you often see result-based programmers as startup employees and pros. Here is speed. But for me, speed is the game. The programming is just another block in the technology. Often priorities lie in goals or creating something while maintaining it later on. These types of programmers often enjoy programming as a byproduct of one is Mark Zuckerberg with his infamous move fast and break things mentality, which in 2014 changed to move fast with stable infrastructure. Maybe he slid a little bit on the scale. Another example could be DHH, who advocates for programmer happiness and not over-engineering solutions. So we know the two types of programmers, which one is better? Well, this is the always happens online. We saw huge and forces still just this kind of this you're thinking you're also thinking for the most and to be honest, there's one side of it. Do you care about programming or do you care about software? When talking about these two competing philosophies, absolutely perfect. This week, we're here talking about service Toastmark, which helps you automate the delivery of software apps. It mentions how after being acquired, the quality of the software it's a self-sufficient causing outages for most users to public their user level silo and set it for 8 resolving charge after application. Sending emails behind a queue. If sending fails, those jobs would be queued up and be retried, which levels reply with blaming the customer for a problem of their business. Last week, I promise. Ultimately, the service level agreement. Your problem, the things you chose, is your decisions, but you know, it's an absolute nightmare. So using a third party, all these systems set up for you just makes sense. It was all these programs because it helps you just get things done much faster. Oh yes, the part is to like something else did something wrong. So how does that work? Something that seems like if your philosophy of programming, see that it falls out, there's all these programs. In 1997, it's equally first before the browser started being which for instance, when you're on the team decided to do it, we sort of the browser. Issue is it took 3 years to see so throughout the video, you probably see one side is the absolute the load. All this what's the other for you to solve these programs, you have to rely on the tested software that's been optimized and fine-tuned for years and years. You can't just build Linux, Redis, Django, Cindy, JSON, and like weekend. There's also a really work on the software that built with all these programs. In these programs projects, they're able to feature scenario. So in this where you're using little smart is kernels always be able to solve it. It's just a C function. So the person wants to write so we can solve these program or these program at the same level could be literally a scale there's all these programs taking out these terrible templates. Sometimes for handling problems with these, you just write code, move on with your day until it's broken. But here's what it is. Look, they're Rust, like UV and Rust, which inboxes first result subjects. They're using Rust, which traditionally is fact-based. To make that which traditionally is result-based. And while they're open source, they've raised $4 million in they're using deep technical craft in order to build products that are faster for result-based programs to program manage it faster. So it's interesting for sure. So if this was a scale, where would you fit all this? Let me know if you might disagree with my whole entire analysis here. Then please let me know in the comments why. Speak into the microphone. Your text appears in the box that you're focused on. But one should is so I looked at speak into the microphone. Your text appears in the box that you're focused on. But one issue is kind of crappy. So I looked up the bets and found that professional is to serve them all. Create your dragon. Exactly. This is software doing it. So I won't be taming a dragon. I will be taming First, speech recognition. Whisper by OpenAI is Whisper CDP, bringing it to C++. Huawei faster Whisper here, which uses something called C2, which Huawei starts insanely fast Whisper, which is Whisper, but uses Optimum and Flash ATTN. It's insanely fast Whisper, which is just so it is insanely fast Whisper. Whisper comes in the sizes tiny and large. The smaller the model, the faster, the less intelligent. First, I give set up right for Whisper model on GPU. Samples are each are it's fine. It's also have you seen any or wrong sense that you want to know ancient starts a new get so load Whisper in your you start recording it's the key this was tweeted it said let all exists so it's like for example it's work for these are so many cases so of course large so like rock 44 milliseconds so you're hoping remove that in order to say so it's the first one here it's so just a reminder, are you talking about this channel? Yeah, I know.
We're back. Hello? 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 Work out. Ay, tari. Mana ko eh. Parang po yung